They told her she didn't belong in first class. They told her to wait outside with the trash. Preston Sterling, a high-flying executive with an ego bigger than the Airbus A380 he was boarding, thought he was putting a confused janitor in her place. He didn't know that the woman in the stained hoodie wasn't just a passenger. She was the woman who had signed his acquisition papers 10 minutes ago. This is the story of how one man's arrogance at Gate 42 led to the most brutal corporate execution in aviation history. You think you know karma? You haven't seen Naomi Dubois get even. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 usually smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety, but today, near the exclusive Royal Monarch Lounge, it smelled distinctly of trouble. Naomi Dubois adjusted the hood of her oversized charcoal grey sweatshirt. It was a Balenciaga piece worth $1,200, but to the untrained eye, and specifically to the eyes of the man standing in front of the priority lane, it looked like gym laundry. She was exhausted. It had been a 72-hour week, culminating in a hostile takeover of Stratford Logistics, a mid-sized shipping giant that had been hemorrhaging money for years. The ink on the digital contracts was barely dry. She just wanted to get on the plane, drink a glass of sparkling water, and sleep until London. She stepped toward the crimson rope separating the first-class boarding lane from the chaotic economy queue. "Excuse me," she murmured, keeping her head down, clutching her boarding pass. A hand, manicured and heavy with a gold signet ring, shot out and blocked her path. "Service entrance is back that way, sweetheart," the man said. His voice was a rich baritone, the kind that was used to commanding boardrooms and ordering expensive scotch. Naomi looked up. The man was tall, wearing a bespoke navy suit that screamed Savile Row. He had the sort of face that aged well only because it had never known a day of true hardship. Preston Sterling. She recognized him instantly, though he clearly didn't recognize her. Preston was the regional VP of operations for Stratford Logistics, the very company she had just bought. He was currently laughing with two other men, younger, sycophantic junior executives named Chad and Oliver, who were holding Toomey briefcases like shields of honor. "I'm sorry," Naomi said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "I'm on this flight." Preston didn't even look her in the eye. He was busy scanning his digital boarding pass at the kiosk, but he kept his arm extended, barring her way. "This is the Diamond Lane. Priority boarding for executives and first-class passengers. The economy cattle call starts in 20 minutes. Go wait by the bathrooms with the rest of the group 4S. Chad snickered. "Maybe she's looking for the cleaning crew roster, Mr. Sterling." Naomi took a deep breath. She wasn't in the mood for a power play. She just wanted a seat. "I have a ticket," she said, stepping around his arm. Preston sidestepped, physically body-blocking her. He turned fully toward her now, his face twisting into a sneer of absolute disgust. He looked her up and down, taking in the messy bun, the lack of makeup, and the sneakers. "Listen to me, you confused little lady," Preston snapped, loud enough for the gate agents to look up. "I don't care if you have a ticket. You're cluttering up the premium aesthetic. You see these people?" He gestured to the line of suits behind him. "We are the people who run the world. You are the people who clean up after us. Now step back, wait outside the roped area, and let the adults board. If you try to cut in line again, I'll have security drag you out." The gate agent, a flustered woman named Brenda, looked up from her computer. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Sterling?" "Yes, Brenda," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This person is harassing the first-class passengers. Can you tell her to wait outside until the general boarding is called? She's blocking the flow." Brenda looked at Naomi. She saw the hoodie. She saw the tired eyes. She didn't see the titanium black status on the manifest yet, because Naomi hadn't scanned her ticket. Brenda, overworked and intimidated by Preston's frequent flyer status, sighed. "Ma'am," Brenda said, her voice tired, "please step aside. We need to clear the priority lane." "I am priority," Naomi said, her voice hardening. She held out her phone. Preston slapped her hand away. It wasn't a violent strike, but it was dismissive. Shocking. The phone clattered to the carpet. The lounge went silent. Oops, Preston smirked. Butterfingers. Now get out of my sight before I lose my temper. You're ruining my pre-flight vibe. Naomi stared at her phone on the floor. It was unlocked. The screen was glowing with an email notification. Acquisition complete. Transfer of assets confirmed. Stratford Logistics. She bent down, picked up the phone, and dusted it off. When she stood up, the exhaustion was gone from her eyes. It was replaced by something cold, something predatory. "You're Preston Sterling," Naomi stated. It wasn't a question. Preston blinked, surprised she knew his name. He puffed out his chest. "That's right. And you are?" "Someone who hates waiting," Naomi said. She turned and walked away. Not to the back of the line, but to a quiet corner near the window. "That's what I thought," Preston called after her, laughing as he high-fived Chad. "Walk of shame. Back to the nosebleeds." Naomi didn't look back. She dialed a number. "This is Evelyn." The crisp voice of her chief of staff answered on the first ring. "Evelyn," Naomi said, watching Preston hand his ticket to the gate agent. "I need the org chart for Stratford Logistics, specifically the European Operations Division." "I have it on your dashboard, Miss Dubois. Is there an issue?" "Not yet," Naomi said, watching Preston disappear down the jet bridge. "But get legal on the line. And Evelyn, tell the pilot not to close the doors until I say so." "Miss Dubois," Evelyn hesitated. "The pilot is Captain Anderson. He's a stickler for schedule." "Captain Anderson works for Dubois Global now," Naomi said softly, "which means he works for me. Tell him I'm coming on board, and tell him I'm bringing some trash that needs to be taken out." The interior of the Boeing 777 was a sanctuary of beige leather and walnut trim. The first-class cabin was arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, offering private suites for the 12 passengers lucky enough to afford the $14,000 ticket. Preston Sterling was settling into Seat 1A, like a king claiming his throne. He had already unbuttoned his suit jacket and was loudly complaining about the temperature of the pre-flight champagne to the flight attendant, a patient woman named Sarah. "I asked for chilled Sarah, not room temperature," Preston groaned, handing the flute back. "Take it away. Bring me a fresh bottle, and make sure it's the Krug, not that domestic swill." "Right away, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her jaw tight. "And where are my boys?" Preston shouted across the aisle. Chad and Oliver were in 2A and 2B, already taking selfies for their Instagram stories with captions like #grindset and #London calling. "We're here, boss," Chad yelled. "Good. We're going to celebrate," Preston announced to the cabin, ignoring the annoyed glare of an elderly couple in row 3. "Just closed a massive quarter. Stratford is untouchable." The plane was mostly full, but Seat 1K, directly across the aisle from Preston, remained empty. "Who's in 1K?" Preston asked Sarah as she returned with a new bottle. "Ideally, nobody. I like the extra privacy." "The manifest lists a VIP, sir," Sarah said diplomatically. "She hasn't boarded yet." "She?" Preston scoffed. "Probably some influencer who's late because she's doing her makeup in the bathroom. If she's not here in 2 minutes, tell the captain to push back. I have a dinner reservation at the Shard." At that moment, the commotion at the front of the plane drew everyone's attention. The heavy curtain swept open. Naomi Dubois walked in. She had shed the hoodie. Underneath, she wore a simple black cashmere turtleneck and tailored trousers. It was understated luxury, the kind that whispered money rather than shouted it. She carried nothing but her phone. She walked straight to Seat 1K. Preston dropped his champagne glass. It didn't break, but the fizz spilled over his bespoke trousers. "You have got to be kidding me," Preston sputtered, dabbing at his lap with a napkin. "How did you get on here? Security! Sarah! The cleaning lady from the gate is on the plane." The cabin went deadly quiet. Naomi ignored him. She sat down in 1K, crossed her legs, and fastened her seatbelt with a definitive click. "Excuse me." Preston unbuckled his belt and stood up, looming over the aisle. "I don't know who you slept with to get an upgrade, sweetheart, but you don't belong here. This cabin is for business leaders, people who matter." Naomi slowly turned her head. Her eyes were dark, unblinking. "Sit down, Preston. You're leaking champagne on the carpet. Do you know who I am?" Preston's face turned a shade of beet red. "I am a senior VP at Stratford. We move the world economy. I can buy and sell your entire family tree." "Stratford," Naomi repeated, testing the word. "Interesting company. I heard their logistics division in Manchester has been falsifying safety records to cut costs." Preston froze. The colour drained from his face slightly. That is proprietary information. That is slander." "Is it?" Naomi pulled her phone out. "And I heard their VP of operations, that would be you, has been funneling consulting fees into a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Apex Horizon." The silence in the cabin was so thick you could choke on it. Chad and Oliver in row 2 stopped taking selfies. They lowered their phones, looking terrified. "Who are you?" Preston whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and sudden, dawning fear. "Are you a reporter? Because if you print one word of that, I will sue you into oblivion. I will ruin you." Naomi smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "You seem obsessed with ruining people today. First at the gate, now here. It's a bad habit, Preston." Just then, the cockpit door opened. Captain Anderson, a veteran pilot with silver hair and 4 stripes on his shoulder, stepped out. Usually pilots stayed in the cockpit during boarding. Preston smirked, relieved. "Finally. Captain, this woman is harassing me. She's an intruder. Have her removed immediately." Captain Anderson walked past Preston as if he were a ghost. He stopped in front of seat 1K. He took off his hat and bowed his head slightly. "Miss Dubois," the captain said, his tone reverent. "Welcome aboard. We received the transfer order from headquarters 10 minutes ago. We are honored to have the new owner flying with us." Preston's knees buckled. He grabbed the headrest of his seat to stay upright. "Owner," Preston squeaked. Naomi looked up at the captain. "Thank you, Captain Anderson. We're going to be delayed a few minutes. I have some HR matters to attend to before we take off." She swiveled her chair to face Preston. "Preston," she said, her voice calm and level. "You asked if I knew who you were. I do. You are an employee of Stratford Logistics, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, Stratford Logistics is a wholly owned subsidiary of Dubois Global." She leaned forward. "I am Naomi Dubois. I am your boss's boss's boss. Preston made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a gag. Miss Dubois, I didn't know. The hoodie. You thought I was someone you could abuse because I didn't look like I had power," Naomi said. "You thought wait outside was an appropriate way to speak to a human being." "It was a misunderstanding," Preston pleaded, his hands shaking. "I was stressed. The merger. We've all been on edge. It was a joke. Chad, tell her it was a joke." He looked back at row 2. Chad and Oliver were staring out the window, pretending to be invisible. "It wasn't a joke, Preston," Naomi said. She tapped her phone screen. "And neither is the audit I just authorized on Apex Horizon." "Miss Dubois, please!" Preston was sweating profusely now. "I have a family. I have a mortgage. I'm flying to London to close the deal that will save the Q3 numbers." "No," Naomi said. "You were flying to London to shred documents before my transition team arrived. We know about the double books, Preston. My forensic accountants found the discrepancy an hour ago. That's why I'm on this flight. I wanted to see the man who stole $4 million from his own company." Naomi looked at Sarah, the flight attendant. "Sarah, is the door still open?" "Yes, Miss Dubois," Sarah said, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Good," Naomi said. "Mr. Sterling won't be joining us to London. You're firing me? Preston gasped. Oh no, Naomi said, standing up. Firing you would be too easy. I'm terminating you for cause, effective immediately, which means no severance, no stock options, and instant forfeiture of your company pension to cover the stolen funds. She pointed to the open cabin door. But right now, I'm just telling you to wait outside. The silence in the first-class cabin had teeth. It was the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster, heavy and suffocating. Every other passenger in the cabin, the elderly couple, a tech billionaire in 3A, a famous architect in 4K, was pretending to read or sleep, but every ear was tuned to frequency 1K. Preston Sterling, stripped of his bluster, looked like a man standing on a trapdoor with the rope already around his neck. You can't do this, Preston whispered, his eyes darting around the cabin, seeking an ally that didn't exist. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Let me fly to London. We can discuss this civilly in the office on Monday. I'll resign. Quietly. Naomi leaned back in her seat, the fine leather creaking softly. She took a slow, deliberate sip from the water glass Sarah had silently placed on her tray table. Civilly? Naomi asked, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the cabin. Was it civil when you blocked me at the gate? Was it civil when you called me the help because I wasn't wearing a $5,000 suit? You wanted a public spectacle, Preston. You wanted to humiliate someone to make yourself feel big. I'm just giving you what you asked for. A spectacle. She turned to the captain, who was still standing like a sentinel in the aisle. Captain Anderson, this individual is trespassing on Dubois Global property. He is no longer an employee, and he is certainly not a passenger. Please escort him off my aircraft. Understood, Miss Dubois, Captain Anderson said. He turned to Preston. His voice changed from deferential to commanding. Sir, you need to grab your belongings and vacate the aircraft immediately. The jet bridge is still connected. Preston didn't move. He looked at Chad and Oliver in row 2, his eyes pleading. Chad, Ollie, say something. Tell her about the Q3 projections. Tell her we're a team. Chad, the young executive who had snickered about the cleaning crew just 20 minutes ago, suddenly found the safety information card intensely fascinating. Oliver stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped his armrests. They were watching their golden goose get slaughtered, and they knew the butcher's blade was swinging toward them next. They can't help you, Preston, Naomi said, following his gaze. They're currently trying to calculate if they have enough money in their 401ks to hire criminal defense attorneys. Sir, Captain Anderson barked, stepping closer. Now! Preston stumbled into the aisle. He looked small. The Savile Row suit suddenly seemed too big for him. He grabbed his Toomey carry-on from the overhead bin with shaking hands, nearly dropping it on the architect in 4K. As he began the long walk towards the cabin door, the reality of what was happening hit him. This wasn't just losing a job. This was social and professional death. He was being ejected from the first-class womb he had spent his entire life believing was his birthright. He stopped at the galley kitchen, right by the exit door. He turned back one last time, his face a rictus of hate and panic. "You'll regret this," he spat at Naomi. "You don't know how Stratford works. It's a machine. You break one gear, the whole thing jams. You need me." Naomi didn't even look up from her phone. "Sarah," she said calmly to the flight attendant, "close the door behind the trash. We have a schedule to keep." Sarah, the flight attendant who had endured Preston's complaints about champagne temperature for years, looked at Preston with sheer, unadulterated pleasure. "Watch your step, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, putting just enough emphasis on the Mr. to make it sound like an insult. Preston stepped onto the jet bridge. The humid air of the terminal hit him like a physical blow. Behind him, the heavy aircraft door sealed shut with a definitive, pressurized thud. He was standing alone on the metal walkway. Through the small porthole window in the door, he could see Sarah locking the mechanism. He walked up the jet bridge, his legs feeling like jelly. When he emerged back into the gate area, it was chaos, the economy passengers were lining up, impatient and loud. Brenda, the gate agent, looked up from her podium. She saw Preston, the man who had insulted her, and the woman in the hoodie just 30 minutes prior, trudging back up the ramp, dragging his bag, his face the color of ashes. Brenda stopped typing. She adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Sterling," she called out over the microphone, her voice unnaturally sweet. "Did you forget something on board? Or perhaps you realized you were in the wrong line, after all?" A few passengers in Group 4 laughed. Preston put his head down and pushed through the crowd, heading for the nearest restroom to vomit. He had been told to wait outside. He just didn't realize outside meant outside of his entire life. The Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate, the mighty GE90 engines humming to life. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The tension hadn't dissipated with Preston's departure. It had merely refocused. Naomi Dubois was now the undisputed center of gravity. The air felt thinner around her. As the plane taxied towards the runway, Naomi tapped away on her phone. She wasn't playing games. She was connected to the secure Dubois global server via the plane's satellite Wi-Fi. She was reading a 90-page due diligence report that her team had finalized at 4 a.m. that morning. The plane roared down the tarmac and lifted into the sky over Jamaica Bay. As soon as the seatbelt sign dinged off at 10,000 feet, Naomi unbuckled. She didn't go to the restroom. She stood up and walked 2 rows back, stopping directly between seats 2A and 2B. Chad and Oliver were paralyzed. They had been hoping, praying, that if they stayed very still, the apex predator in 1K would forget they existed. Naomi rested one hand on Chad's headrest and the other on Oliver's. She leaned in close, her voice a soft, terrifying murmur beneath the drone of the engines. "Gentlemen," she began, "enjoying the flight so far?" "Miss Dubois," Chad stammered, his voice cracking. He was a 28-year-old MBA from Wharton who usually thrived on intimidation, but he was currently dissolving into a puddle of sweat. We didn't know about Preston, about any of it. We were just following orders." "We're upset," Oliver added quickly, trying to sound outraged. "Deeply upset by what you revealed about the Cayman accounts. We had no idea Preston was rogue." Naomi chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Sarah?" Naomi called out without turning around. "Yes, Miss Dubois." The flight attendant appeared instantly with a silver tray. "Another sparkling water for me. And for these two." Naomi looked down at them. Tap water. Lukewarm. "They don't deserve the bottled stuff right now." She turned back to the 2 junior executives. "Let's cut the crap, shall we?" Naomi said, dropping the facade of politeness. "I have the transaction logs for Apex Horizon." Preston wasn't smart enough to hide the IP addresses. Guess whose corporate laptops logged into that account 14 times last month to authorize wire transfers? She held up her phone. On the screen were 2 names, Chadwick Bentley and Oliver Cruz. The blood drained from Chad's face so fast he looked like a cadaver. Oliver began to hyperventilate quietly. "And there must be a mistake," Chad tried, feeble. "Preston used my laptop sometimes. He borrowed it." "Stop," Naomi said, sharp as a whip crack. "You're insulting my intelligence. You two weren't just following orders. You were his bagmen. You sterilized the invoices. You bullied the Manchester depot manager into signing off on faulty cargo containers. You're not victims. You're accomplices." She stood up straight, towering over them in the small aisle. "We have a 7-hour flight ahead of us. Here is how this is going to work. This plane is now a grand jury room. I am the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury. By the time we land at Heathrow, I will have the full truth about the European Operations Division." She paused, letting the threat hang in the pressurized cabin air. "If you lie to me, if you try to cover for Preston, or if you forget anything, when we land, the London Metropolitan Police Economic Crime Unit will be waiting at the jet bridge, holding warrants based on the evidence I already have. You'll be facing 10 to 15 years for wire fraud and corporate espionage." Oliver let out a small sob. Option B, Naomi continued, her voice slightly softer, offering a microscopic lifeline. You sing, loud and clear. You tell me where every buried body is. You tell me about the safety inspector bribes in Hamburg. You tell me about the ghost employees on the payroll in Lyon. You give me everything Preston has on everyone else in the company. What happens if we do? Oliver whispered, wiping his nose on his expensive cuff. You still get fired, Naomi said bluntly. Today, with cause. You'll never work in finance or logistics again. But Dubois Global will decline to press criminal charges. We'll handle it internally. You walk away broke and blacklisted, but you walk away free. She looked at her watch, a simple but elegant Cartier tank. You have until we reach cruising altitude to decide. That's about 4 minutes. She turned and walked back to seat 1K, leaving them in the suffocating grip of the prisoner's dilemma. Back in her seat, Naomi put on her noise-cancelling headphones, not playing music, just drowning out the world. She closed her eyes for a second. The adrenaline surge from the gate confrontation was fading, replaced by the deep, bone-weary exhaustion she had felt earlier. She hated this part. People thought CEOs loved the power trips, but firing people, even corrupt ones, was draining. It was necessary corporate chemotherapy. The tumor had to be removed to save the host. But it was ugly work. A shadow fell over her aisle. It was Chad. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Miss Dubois, he murmured. Naomi slid one headphone cup off her ear. Yes, Mr. Bentley? We're ready to talk, he said, his voice hollow. Oliver is getting his laptop. We have the encrypted files, the ones Preston thought he deleted. Naomi nodded slowly. Smart choice. Sarah will bring you coffee. Black. You're going to need it. Start writing everything down. I want a full confession signed by both of you before we cross the Atlantic. As Chad retreated, defeated, Naomi looked out the window. The plane was soaring above the clouds now, the sky a brilliant, piercing blue. Below them, thousands of miles away, on the linoleum floor of a JFK terminal bathroom, Preston Sterling was currently staring at his reflection in a dirty mirror. His company iPhone was remotely wiped and bricked, a useless piece of glass and metal. His corporate Amex had just been declined at the terminal bar when he tried to buy a double scotch. He was frantic, using a payphone, something he hadn't touched since the 90s, trying to remember phone numbers he always had on speed dial. He called his secretary's direct line. It went straight to voicemail, but it wasn't her usual greeting. It was a generic, robotic voice. The extension you were trying to reach is no longer in service. Naomi hadn't just fired him. In the 20 minutes since takeoff, her team on the ground had already begun dismantling his entire departmental infrastructure. Preston Sterling was being erased. The karma wasn't just hitting back. It was running him over with a steamroller, backing up and doing it again. While Naomi Dubois was cruising at 38,000 feet, sipping chamomile tea and dissecting the corrupt anatomy of Stratford logistics, Preston Sterling was experiencing a very different kind of altitude sickness, the rapid descent to rock bottom. It had been 90 minutes since the heavy door of the Boeing 777 slammed shut in his face. Preston was still at JFK Terminal 4, but he was no longer the master of the universe. He was a man loitering near the baggage claim carousels, sweaty, disheveled, and rapidly running out of options. He had tried to leave the airport, but the universe, and Naomi's legal team, was moving faster than he could comprehend. When he attempted to hail an Uber Black, the app flashed a red error message. Payment method declined. Please contact your card issuer. He tried his personal Visa. Declined. He tried his frantic, secret, emergency MasterCard linked to the Cayman account. Card blocked. Suspicious activity. This isn't happening, Preston muttered, staring at his phone screen, which was cracking under the pressure of his grip. She can't freeze my personal assets. That's illegal. That takes a court order. He didn't realize that Naomi Dubois didn't need a court order to freeze the accounts. She simply needed to flag the source of the funds. Since the forensic audit had identified his personal accounts as recipients of stolen corporate funds, the banks, terrified of the wrath of Dubois Global, had proactively locked everything down pending an investigation. It was the financial equivalent of a medically induced coma. Preston was forced to do the unthinkable. He had to take a yellow cab, and he had to pay with the crumpled $80 of emergency cash he kept in his money clip. "Midtown," Preston barked at the driver, slamming the door. "Stratford Logistics Tower, 6th Avenue, and step on it." The traffic into Manhattan was a nightmare. Preston spent the hour-long ride sweating through his dress shirt, his mind racing. He needed to get to the office. He needed to get to the physical files in his safe. The digital trail was compromised. Chad and Oliver were probably singing like canaries by now, but the hard copies of the vendor contracts in his office safe would prove that the kickbacks were technically referral fees. It was a thin defense, but it was all he had. The cab pulled up to the gleaming glass monolith of the Stratford Tower. Preston threw the cash at the driver and didn't wait for change. He sprinted toward the revolving doors, his Toomey bag bouncing awkwardly behind him. He burst into the lobby, breathless. The marble expanse was cool and quiet. He walked straight towards the turnstiles, fishing for his security badge. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice came from the security desk. It wasn't the usual guard, a friendly guy named Jose, who Preston occasionally nodded at. It was a new man, broad-shouldered, wearing a blazer that was too tight around the biceps. Private security. "Not now," Preston snapped, slapping his badge against the reader. Beep, beep. Red light. Access denied. Preston slapped it again. Harder. Beep, beep. Damn it. Preston kicked the turnstile. "Hey, you! Open the gate! My badge is demagnetized." The broad-shouldered man stepped out from behind the desk. He was followed by two others. They didn't look like lobby guards. They looked like bouncers for a very exclusive, very dangerous club. "Mr. Sterling," the head guard said, his voice flat. "Your credentials have been revoked effective 9:15 a.m. "Revoked? I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations," Preston screamed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. People in the lobby, interns, delivery guys, other executives, stopped to watch. "I have critical documents in my office. I need to get up there." "You have no office, sir," the guard said. He held up a clipboard. "We have a strict directive from the new ownership. Dubois Global Transition Team. You are barred from the premises." Preston stared at him. Then he saw it. Behind the turnstiles, by the elevators, a group of people in dark suits were carrying cardboard boxes out. They were Dubois auditors. They were already clearing out his floor. "You can't do this!" Preston lunged for the turnstile, trying to hop over it. The security guard moved with frightening speed. He grabbed Preston by the back of his expensive suit jacket and hauled him back. It wasn't a gentle escort. It was a physical removal. "Let go of me! Do you know who I am?" Preston shrieked as he was dragged toward the revolving doors. "Yes, sir," the guard said, shoving him towards the exit. "You're the guy who's been told to wait outside." Preston stumbled out onto the sidewalk, nearly tripping over a hot dog cart. The humiliation was total. He was standing on 6th Avenue, locked out of his kingdom, with nothing but his luggage and a dead career. His phone buzzed. Finally, a call. It was his wife, Jessica. "Jessica!" Preston gasped, answering. "Thank God. Listen, something insane is happening. I need you to transfer money from your personal savings to—" "Preston!" Jessica's voice was ice cold. "Why are there FBI agents in our living room?" Preston's blood turned to slush. "What?" "They have a search warrant, Preston," she hissed. "They're taking the computers. They're taking the safe. They said it's about wire fraud and embezzlement. They said you used my name on one of the shell companies." "Jess, I can explain." "Don't," she cut him off. "My lawyer is already on the way. Not our lawyer. My lawyer. Don't come home, Preston. I don't want the kids to see you like this." The line went dead. Preston Sterling stood on the sidewalk. It started to rain, a cold, grey New York drizzle. He looked at the glass doors of the building he used to rule. Inside, it was warm. Inside, there was power. He walked towards the awning to get out of the rain. "Excuse me, buddy." The doorman, a man Preston had never tipped in 10 years, stepped in front of him. "This area is for building personnel and guests only." I just need to stay dry," Preston whispered. The doorman looked at him. He recognized Preston. He remembered every time Preston had walked past him without a hello, every time Preston had treated him like a piece of furniture. "Sorry," the doorman said, pointing to the uncovered sidewalk. "You'll have to wait outside." 7 hours later, the Dubois Global jet descended through the thick cloud layer over London. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was funereal, for everyone except Naomi. Chad and Oliver sat in row 2, pale and hollow-eyed. They had spent the last 6 hours handwriting a 40-page confession. Their hands were cramping. Their spirits were broken. They had detailed every bribe, every falsified manifest, and every hush-money payment Preston had authorized. They had sold their boss down the river to save their own skins, just as Naomi knew they would. Naomi freshened up in the lavatory. She reapplied her lipstick, a deep oxblood red, and smoothed her hair. She didn't look like a woman who had just crossed an ocean. She looked like a gladiator entering the arena. The plane touched down at Heathrow. As they taxied to the private terminal, Naomi saw 3 black Range Rovers waiting on the tarmac. "Chad, Oliver," Naomi said as the plane came to a halt, "you two will go with the second car. My legal team is in there. They will take your official depositions. If you deviate even one word from what you wrote on this plane, the deal is off. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Miss Dubois," they chorused, heads bowed. "Good. Get out of my sight." Naomi descended the stairs. A tall man with an umbrella was waiting for her. This was Marcus, her head of global security. "Welcome to London, Miss Dubois," Marcus said, holding the door of the lead Range Rover open. "The board is assembled at the Shard. They think it's a standard meet and greet with the new owner." "Do they know Preston isn't with me?" Naomi asked, sliding into the leather seat. "No, ma'am. They believe he's delayed. They're expecting you to be amiable." Naomi smiled. "Let's not disappoint them." The convoy tore through the London traffic. The destination was the Shard, the jagged glass skyscraper that pierced the London skyline. Stratford Logistics' European headquarters occupied the 45th floor, boasting panoramic views of the city, views that cost the company millions in rent, while their ground-level workers were underpaid. The elevator ride up was silent. Naomi checked her phone. The FBI update from New York had come in. Preston's home had been raided. The assets were seized. The trap had snapped shut on that side of the Atlantic. Now, for the London branch. The elevator doors opened directly into the boardroom lobby. A receptionist, looking terrified, jumped up. "Miss Dubois, we weren't expecting you for another 10 minutes. "I like to be early," Naomi said, striding past her. "Is the board inside?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Montgomery is chairing the meeting." Naomi didn't knock. She pushed the heavy double doors open and walked in. The boardroom was magnificent. A 20-foot mahogany table was surrounded by 10 men and 2 women, all dressed in suits that cost more than most people's cars. At the head of the table sat Alistair Montgomery, the director of European sales. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and a perpetual sneer, very much cut from the same cloth as Preston Sterling. The room went silent as Naomi entered. She walked to the opposite end of the table and stood there. She didn't sit. She didn't offer a handshake. Alistair cleared his throat. He didn't stand up. "Miss Dubois," Alistair said, his tone dripping with a patronizing sweetness. "Welcome to London. We were expecting Preston to introduce us. Is he fetching your bags?" A few of the executives chuckled. It was a subtle dig, a way of reminding her that she was an outsider, a woman, and in their eyes, lesser. Naomi placed her phone on the table. She looked at Alistair. "Preston Sterling has been terminated for cause," she announced. Her voice was calm, but it projected to the back of the room. "He is currently under investigation by the FBI for wire fraud. I suggest you don't joke about him unless you want to be implicated in his crimes." The chuckles died instantly. Alistair's smile faltered. "Terminated?" Alistair scoffed, trying to regain control. "Now see here, Miss Dubois. You may be the new owner, but you can't just barge in here and fire senior leadership without consulting the board. We have bylaws, we have procedures. This is the United Kingdom, not the Wild West." "I didn't come here to consult, Alistair," Naomi said. "I came here to clean." She tapped her phone. A projector screen descended from the ceiling. "What is this?" Alistair demanded. "I am chairing this meeting." "Not anymore," Naomi said. On the screen, a spreadsheet appeared. It was complex, filled with red lines and highlighted cells. "This," Naomi gestured to the screen, "is a summary of the marketing expenses for the European division over the last 3 years. Notice the pattern? Millions of pounds funneled into a firm called London Bridge Consulting." She looked around the table, making eye contact with every single person. "I had my team run a check on London Bridge Consulting. It has no office, no website, no employees. But strangely, its bank account is registered to an address in Kensington." Naomi looked directly at Alistair. 142 Kensington Park Road. "That's your house, isn't it, Alistair?" The room gasped. Alistair turned a shade of purple that was medically concerning. That is preposterous," Alistair shouted, standing up and slamming his hand on the table. "How dare you? I have served this company for 30 years. You are a visitor here. You don't understand how we do business." "I understand exactly how you do business," Naomi countered, her voice raising just enough to drown him out. "You steal, you lie, and you assume that because I'm a woman, because I'm black, and because I'm new, I won't notice." She signaled to Marcus, who was standing by the door. He opened it, and 4 officers from the City of London Police walked in. "Alistair Montgomery," Naomi said, her voice dropping to a judge's finality. "You are relieved of your duties, effective immediately, and I believe these officers would like a word with you regarding corporate embezzlement and tax evasion." "You can't do this," Alistair sputtered as the officers approached him. "The board will not stand for this. I am the director." Naomi looked at the rest of the table. The other 11 executives were frozen in terror. They looked from Naomi to the police, then down at their polished shoes. "Does anyone else want to object?" Naomi asked the room. "Does anyone else have a consulting firm they'd like to tell me about? Or are we ready to get to work?" Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Alistair was handcuffed. The click of the metal was the loudest sound in the room. As they led him out, he looked at Naomi with pure venom. "You're making a mistake," he spat. "You need me. The clients love me." "The clients loved the money you were bribing them with," Naomi corrected. "We're going to try a new strategy. Honesty. It's radical, I know." As Alistair was dragged out, shouting about lawsuits and unfair dismissal, Naomi finally pulled out the chair at the head of the table, Alistair's chair. She sat down. She looked at the remaining executives. They were trembling. They realized that the predator had just eaten the biggest lion in the pride, and they were all gazelles. "Now," Naomi said, opening her folder, "let's discuss the Q4 strategy. And let's be clear, the next person who tells me to wait, or tells me what I can't do, will be joining Alistair and Preston. Are there any questions?" One brave woman, the VP of HR, raised her hand slightly. "No, Miss Dubois. No questions." "Excellent," Naomi smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. "Let's begin." The arrest of Alistair Montgomery was not the end of the meeting. It was merely the opening act. As the heavy doors closed behind the disgraced director, the air in the boardroom was so thin it felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out by the sheer force of Naomi's presence. 10 executives remained. They sat in their ergonomic Herman Miller chairs, looking like school children awaiting the principal's cane. They had spent years comfortably insulated by Alistair's corruption, turning a blind eye to the rot because the bonuses were good and the champagne was cold. Naomi didn't sit in Alistair's chair for long. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the grey sprawl of London. Alistair was the head of the snake, she said, her back to them. But a snake has a long body. And I don't like snakes. She turned around. I have read the HR reports. I have seen the complaints from the warehouse staff in Birmingham. Complaints about unpaid overtime, safety violations, and harassment that were systematically ignored by this management team. She pointed to a man in a pinstriped suit, David Thorne, the VP of Human Resources. David, Naomi said softly, you rejected 42 separate grievances from the logistics floor last year. You labeled them as unsubstantiated without conducting a single interview. Is that correct? David swallowed hard, loosening his tie. Miss Dubois, we were under pressure to keep costs down. Alistair said. I don't care what Alistair said, Naomi cut him off. You were the shield that protected the predators. You're fired. Clear your desk. You have 10 minutes. David stood up, his legs shaking, and walked out without a word. One by one, Naomi went around the table. The VP of Finance, who had signed off on the phantom consulting fees, fired. The Director of Operations, who had cut the budget for vehicle maintenance, fired. By the time the sun began to set over the Thames, the boardroom was empty, save for Naomi and one woman, Sarah Jenkins, a quiet 30-year-old junior executive who had been taking furious notes in the corner. She wasn't part of the inner circle. She was the one who did the actual work, while the others played golf. You, Naomi said, looking at Sarah. You wrote the minority report last quarter, the one warning that the Manchester facility was a safety hazard. Sarah looked up, terrified. Yes, Ma'am. Alistair threw it in the shredder. I know, Naomi said. I recovered the digital backup from the server. Naomi walked over to Alistair's empty chair at the head of the table. She pulled it out. Sit here, Naomi commanded. Miss Dubois, Sarah stammered. That's the director's chair. It's the interim CEO's chair now, Naomi said, a small smile finally breaking her icy demeanor. You're the only person in this room who tried to tell the truth. That makes you qualified. Clean up this mess, Sarah. Rehire the safety inspectors. Pay the warehouse staff their overtime. Make this company something I don't have to be ashamed of. Sarah stood up, tears welling in her eyes, and slowly sat in the leather chair. It was a transfer of power that sent a shockwave through the entire European division. 6 months later. The winter wind at JFK Airport was biting, cutting through the thin polyester uniforms of the contract ground staff. At the curb of Terminal 4, the kiss-and-fly drop-off zone was a chaotic symphony of honking horns and shouting travelers. A man in a neon yellow vest was struggling to organize a line of luggage carts. He looked older than his years, his face gaunt, his hair thinning and grey. It was Preston Sterling. There were no more bespoke suits, no more Savile Row tailoring. He wore a generic, ill-fitting uniform with a name tag that simply read, P. Sterling, Porter. Karma hadn't just hit him, it had dismantled him. After the incident on the plane, the dominoes had fallen with terrifying precision. The FBI investigation into the wire fraud had drained his savings for legal defense. He avoided prison time only by cutting a plea deal that required him to pay back every cent of the stolen $4 million, plus penalties. He had lost the house in the Hamptons. He had lost the penthouse in Manhattan. His wife, Jessica, had left him and taken the kids, citing irreconcilable ethical differences and the fact that he was now destitute. Blacklisted from every financial and logistics firm in the Western Hemisphere, Preston had been forced to take the only job he could get, manual labor at the very airport where he used to be a king. Hey, buddy. A young man in a sleek business suit snapped his fingers at Preston. He was standing next to a black limousine, holding a platinum credit card. "Get these bags," the young man ordered, not even looking at Preston, "and be careful with them. That's Louis Vuitton." Preston flinched. The tone was identical to the one he had used on Naomi Dubois just half a year ago. "Yes, sir," Preston mumbled, grabbing the heavy handles. "Right away, sir." As he heaved the bags onto the cart, his back aching, a shadow fell over him. A sleek, black Gulfstream G650 had just landed and was taxiing towards the private hangars visible from the roadway. The tail number was painted in gold, DG001. Preston froze. He knew that plane. He looked up at the digital billboard above the terminal entrance. It was playing a news segment from Bloomberg. The headline read, "Dubois Global Turnaround: How Stratford Logistics Became the Most Profitable Shipper in Europe." On the screen, Naomi Dubois was standing at a podium looking radiant and powerful. Next to her was Sarah Jenkins. They were announcing a new profit-sharing initiative for all warehouse employees. "We believe," Naomi was saying to the camera, "that the people who build the company should share in the wealth. We don't ask our people to wait outside. We invite them to the table." Preston stared at the screen, mesmerizingly painful. "Hey, Earth to Porter!" the young man in the suit yelled, clapping his hands. "I'm in a rush. Stop staring at the TV and move the bags. That woman is a billionaire. You're just the help. Know your place." Preston looked at the young man. He wanted to scream. He wanted to say, "I used to be like you. I used to be better than you." But he didn't. He couldn't. "I'm sorry," Preston whispered, bowing his head in total defeat. "I'm moving them now." He pushed the heavy cart into the terminal, disappearing into the crowd of anonymous faces, just another ghost in the machine he used to think he owned. He was finally and permanently on the outside. Preston Sterling learned the hard way that the toes you step on today might be attached to the foot that kicks you out the door tomorrow. He judged Naomi Dubois by her hoodie and missed the empire she carried in her pocket. In the end, he didn't lose his job because he was incompetent. He lost his life because he was cruel. It costs $0 to be decent. But arrogance? Arrogance cost Preston everything. This story is a reminder to everyone watching. Treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO, because you never know when the roles might reverse. The world is small, and karma has a photographic memory. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next saga about corporate takedowns and real-life revenge. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone like Preston get what they deserved? I'll be reading your stories below. Stay humble, and I'll see you in the next video.